I now turn it over to Respectability's own California director, Matan Koch. Matan is a person with a disability, a graduate of Harvard Law School, Yale undergrad, and someone who has spent a lifetime both inside government and engaging from the outside. He is a true champion. He will introduce our esteemed panel. Matan, lead the way.
Thank you, Chairman Bartlett. In 20 years of advocating for this community inside and outside of government, I've always been in awe of the committed civil servants who work with us, the public, to create the future that we all want to see. It gives me great pleasure to very briefly introduce three of the finest of those individuals. I'm going to briefly introduce because they're going to give a more full introduction in this part of their first panel. But first, can I ask the panelists for the first panel to turn on your video and be ready to unmute your audio? All right, fantastic. So we have on our panel Jaime Pacheco-Orozco, who is the Deputy Director of the Los Angeles Department of Disability. We have Andrea Jennings, actress, model, public speaker, a commissioner of the Pasadena Disability Commission, and a founder of Shifting Creative Paradigms Entertainment and Productions, Leveling the Playing Field, and Anastasia Somoza, disability liaison to the Speaker of the New York City Council. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm not going to speak at great length right now because people came to hear you, not to hear me. And so I think first you are each going to share with us a little bit about how, as a person with a disability, you came to public service and you came to do the work that you do. Jaime, might we start with you on that?
Jaime Pacheco-Orozco with the Department of Disability. As Matan said, I am the Assistant Executive Director of the department. I'm a 58-year-old male, heterosexual Chicano with both hidden and visible disabilities. I stutter and frequently speak much too quickly. An unfortunate combination, particularly in these types of convenings. So I ask you to bear with me. I am wearing a charcoal gray suit with a white shirt and a gray tie that has a pattern of diamonds. I wear glasses and I'm sporting a COVID mustache and have a receding salt and pepper hairline. I'm sitting in my office in front of a blank cream-colored wall. I'm pleased to be a part of this gathering and discussion, not only as a representative of the best department of the city of Los Angeles, but also as a person with disabilities and as a father of two older teenage sons with hidden disabilities. As part of my response to your question, I'd like to take the opportunity to acknowledge a few folks who have guided me through this process, who shaped the way I saw myself as being an individual with disabilities, with multiple disabilities, and who encouraged me along the way to stay focused on the end game, particularly when confronted with challenging individuals and institutions. First and foremost are my mother and father, Maria and Jesus Pacheco. My mother would always remind me, los milagros sí existen, miracles do exist. And my father would say, nada es imposible, nothing is impossible. I will come back to them later on. Two other folks I'd like to acknowledge are Sue Quigley and Lisa Jordan, both of whom I walked alongside in the halls of DC and Sacramento as we advocated for the rights of people with disabilities to be full participants in the nation's workforce development system. Lastly, three other individuals who helped me understand the obligation that I have to speak up for marginalized communities. Don Nakanishi, who interviewed me for college 41 years ago, Robin Wings, who served as an academic mentor both in my undergraduate and graduate school, and A. Partly Chiamati, who while serving as president of Yale University would refer to himself as simply a professor of English. My first recollection of the power of the individual advocacy goes back to when I was 6 years old. I was born with a congenital hip disorder, and I spent a good amount of my time in and out of the hospital. And in my first grade, I was discharged from the hospital wearing leg braces. I walked to school, which was about 1.5 miles away from the housing development where I lived. As I walked to the front gate, I was stopped by the schoolyard supervisor. The principal showed up and told me I wasn't allowed to attend school. I walked back home, and my father asked me why I wasn't in school. I told him what had happened, and he assumed I was embarrassed to be at school with my braces. He took me back and the principal told me it wasn't safe for me to be there, that there were stairs, that I could get hurt being on campus. My father looked surprised because we lived in the second story of a project. The principal didn't care. He said I could go to the special school for students like me, that I could take the yellow bus. My father simply said no, he needs to be here with his brothers, and he refused to leave until I was allowed in. We came back each and every day to school for the next 10 days and waited outside the school for the entire school day. And each and every night, my mom and I would pray that the school principal would find it in his heart to change his resistance. I remember being embarrassed and begging my father to stop, to just let me go to the other school. He refused and said I had every right to be there with my older brothers. The principal finally relented and allowed me to attend, with the condition that we agreed not to hold the district liable for any issues that might arise. Many years later, I found myself in a comparable situation when my oldest son started school, and our district told us that they could not accommodate him on campus. And then subsequently, my wife and I had to continue the fight to ensure that our youngest son has the necessary accommodations in place so that he has a free and appropriate public education. In that process, we have learned that our efforts have had a broader impact beyond our own children. I have spent the past 20 years working to ensure that people with disabilities are afforded the same opportunities and held to the same expectations as those without disabilities. Fortunately, I've worked alongside with incredibly intelligent and progressive individuals who have stressed the importance of listening to our constituents. As we say in the disability community, nothing about us without us. That is why, as my mentors told me many times, I believe we each have an obligation to advocate for others, particularly if we're able to be a voice for them. And that really is how I came to be involved in public service. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime. And now, Andrea, I would pose the same question to you, sort of how your personal disability journey brought you into this realm of public service.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor. Happy birthday, ADA. Happy 30th birthday, ADA. Such a pleasure to be here. My personal journey, I was not born with a disability. I acquired a disability. First of all, let me back up. Let me give my description. I'm a Black woman, brown complexion, medium length hair. I'm wearing a royal blue blouse. I'm heterosexual. And I'm just proud to be here. I was not born with a disability. I acquired a disability from a major car accident. And, you know, the residual effects left me with limitations. And when I tried to, you know, go back to work and go back into the community, I noticed that there were so many barriers. This was back in the year 2000. And I was so surprised. I knew that there was civil rights for people with disabilities, so I did not realize that the rights were not being adhered to. And I grew up in a household, my mom actually worked for top law firms. So I grew up in a household where we were told to use our voice, and I was never told to hold back, you know, and my mother was very solution oriented. So when there was a problem, she would teach me how to resolve that and stand up for myself, which is so important. She was a major influence for me. And so when I became disabled, I was shocked that these things weren't in place. I formed an organization, Shifting Creative Paradigms. At that point, it was more to create leadership roles for people with disabilities. And when we would have our meetings, I noticed that the attendees would say, let's meet. And I would suggest restaurants, and they would say, well, we can't go to these restaurants because it's not accessible. Now, this was back in the year 2000, and I was shocked again. And so, you know, they were used to not having their voices heard, and that hurt me. And that's when I decided I've got to do something about this. I think for so long, no one listened to them, that they had just lost a desire to continue to speak. Me being a newly disabled, newly injured person, I was like, no, we need to do something. So I called those restaurants and I said, hey, we've got 7 wheelchairs coming. You need to pull those chairs out and, find a table that you can see this, properly, and, treat us with dignity. And I was nice about it, but I had to be firm. And, eventually I started to attend meetings in my community, and I started to speak up and encourage people and encourage my disabled friends. And it was something that I realized I wasn't just doing for myself, but I was doing for others. And I feel like a lot of times, even the intersectionality of my identity, being that I'm a Black woman with a disability, I feel that sometimes for so long that we're told, because I belong to so many underrepresented groups, that our voice doesn't matter. So one of the things I do as a leader is to tell people that your voice does matter. Use your voice. Your voice is your power. And so eventually, after going to different meetings, I met with different leaders, and they showed me how to speak up. I even met actor Danny Woodburn at an event, and he spoke with me just to tell you how important it is to use your influence and your platform, and just speaking to people, and what that can do to you. Even, with my mom speaking to me, how that encouraged me as a child, with Danny Woodburn and other civic leaders encouraging me. But Danny Woodburn told me to speak boldly when I advocate, and that meant a lot to me, because many times people don't want to tell women to speak up. And so he encouraged me. So that is how important it is. Representation matters. When someone sees someone that looks like them in a leadership role, that speaks volumes. And people with disabilities make over 1/4 of the world's population. We are opinion leaders, and we have buying power. And people need to pay attention to us and add us in that conversation that so often we're left out with diversity conversations. Disability is a part of diversity. And so that was my path to becoming a civic leader. And I encourage people that want to get involved to remember that your voice matters.
Thank you so much for that, Andrea. In a moment, we're going to pose the same question to Anastasia, but I want to remind you that these panelists will be answering questions at the end of the panel, so please put your questions for them in the Q&A box. They want to equip you to engage in your own civic leadership, but you can only do that if you ask your questions. Anastasia, if you could tell us a little bit about your path to coming to public service.
Thank you, Matan, and for my fellow panelists, and to Jennifer Mizrahi and to Respectability for having me. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. My name is Anastasia Somoza, and before I start telling you my personal story, I'll describe my background a little bit, or where I am and what I look like. I have a light white skin complexion, medium dark brown hair. I'm wearing a white top with gold buttons on the top of the shoulders, and I'm sitting in my living room, in a room with red walls, with a couch behind me and a table that has some magazines and flowers on top of it. So to begin my personal story, as I've often said, I didn't choose advocacy. Advocacy chose me. And the reason I say that is because I became an advocate at a very young age because of my lived experience. I recognized when I was very, very little, partially because I have both a disabled identical twin sister, so 2 of us have disabilities, and 2 of my siblings do not have disabilities. And thanks to my parents and my mother, who was already developing herself as an advocate in New York State and nationally when we were young, she, began to involve us in developing our own experiences and our own voices. And when I say our, I'm speaking about myself and my twin sister. We both have cerebral palsy. And my sister Alba is also nonverbal, so she uses assistive technology to speak. And it was even harder back in the early 90s to convince people to unlock her potential to live and learn happily and productively in the community. So the first big opportunity I had to realize the power of my own voice was when I had the honor of speaking with President Clinton as a part of a children's town hall meeting back in February of 1993, where he invited a diverse group of kids to talk to him about any issue that they cared about. And at the time, my twin and I were, watching our mother and our family advocate for our right to go to school in an integrated, like one of the previous panelists said, gain access to free, appropriate public education, like the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act requires. And for some reason, I was, integrated right away. I was plopped in a mainstream classroom and nobody questioned that, but that wasn't the case for my twin sister, Alba. And I came upon an opportunity to speak with President Clinton, and I did. I asked him to help us to mainstream my twin sister, and the next September, she became the first severely disabled youngster to be fully integrated in the New York City public school system. And that was, as I mentioned earlier, the first big moment and realization at only 9 years old that even I had the power to change something if I saw that something in the system needed to be changed. And I consider myself to be very lucky because I was raised by parents and a family that never gave me a reason to question that I was worthy and capable of achieving the same things as my non-disabled siblings. But the reason why I grew to recognize the power of public service and eventually ended up continuing to become my own advocate in, independent to my mother and what I had learned from her, is because I realized that that's how you make change. You not only follow people, but the more of us that more people that look like me that get to serve in government and hopefully in the future run for public office, that is how we're really going to see that the greater degree of social change that we really need to see. The ADA has changed a lot, but we have a long way to go in terms of moving society at large beyond, meeting the minimum requirements and really integrating it into the way that, everybody lives their life. And I think that's going to take not only disabled individuals like us, but, society at large. And being a part of the political process just was my way of developing my voice and not only, succeeding on a personal level, but also helping others in my community um, gain access to the same opportunities. And that's why I'm so proud to serve in the capacity that I do. Um,
Thank you so much for that, Anastasia. So, as you've now heard each panelist speak of how they came to public service, but part of our real goal today is to help the public, understand how that you can be involved with your government. And so now I've asked these panelists if they would speak to an experience, an anecdote, a moment, an explanation of where interacting with the public has been, particularly helpful to their advocacy. Andrea, could you perhaps lead us off on that one? And we'll do about 4 minutes each, guys, if that's all right.
Sure. Thank you again. I have some good memories this past year. Prior to COVID, when we were able to go out, my commission, we did a lot of tabling events, and I volunteered to be on a few of them. It was so exciting to see the community and engage with the community. And it wasn't in an intrusive way. When you do tabling events, people come to you. But we have the signage, and it's really big that we are the Accessibility and Disability Commission. And so it was great to see the community come to the table and ask questions and feel, again, that representation when they see that someone looks like them. And one of the things that makes me feel proud to be a civic leader in that capacity is that I can, speak with the community. Although my role is more advisory, it's also so important because I'm more connected to the community. I recall children coming up to the table and asking questions, and I recall people with disabilities, walking by. They're at this event, but they didn't realize that, like, oh my God, this I can relate to this person, and we have conversations. Another time that I remember is just when I was being sworn in for my position. I had invited 2 10-year-olds to witness the event, because it's not often that you see a Black disabled woman be sworn into, any office. And so I wanted that to, like my mom did, influence me. And I spoke with them, and I talked to them about the hierarchies. And, we sometimes don't realize that even though they're not a voting age, what we instill in them now is so important. And they understood. And so, in 10 more years, when ADA is 40, these 10-year-olds will, be 20, so they'll be able to vote. So those are some memories, some great memories that I have.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Anastasia, same question, just an anecdote, a moment that really shows the power of the public interacting with you.
For me, I have many of those, but one, an ongoing one, I guess you could say. Before I served with the speaker, a lot of my early work in public service revolved in participating in campaigns, and that gave me a lot of confidence. And when you're first starting to work on campaigns, I think most young people who have done that will have had experiences where they have to, sit at a front desk and take calls, or be, for me, I live in New York City, so I would often have to go out into the neighborhood and stand on the sidewalk with flyers and talk to people about why I was supporting a candidate, and get comfortable with putting myself out there and recognizing that some people were gonna see that as a positive thing, and others were maybe gonna state an opinion that was different from mine, and learning how to be brave enough to shape my own opinions and stand by them and defend them and get into sometimes difficult conversations with people who disagree with you, again, is just another way that I strengthened my skills, learned to believe in myself, and learned to also hone the ability to listen. And understand how important it is to be not only have a strong voice, but also recognize that as a leader and as somebody who served in does public service in any capacity, listening is a essential and vital part of that. Letting everyone tell their stories and working really hard to represent people from all walks of life and lived experiences.
Thank you so much for that. Jaime, same question, because I also want to make sure we have some time for these great questions coming in the Q&A box. Give us your personal take on this one as well.
Thank you, Matan. I'm going to make it very brief, and it may get me into some trouble here, so bear with me if they cut me off at some point. I think back to the power of advocacy, particularly of parents. Prior to the COVID situation, we actually had a group of mothers come to us. They were parents of children with disabilities who relied on the LAUSD buses to transport their kids to and from school, home to school. And their IEPs were clearly specific that it was door-to-door transportation made available to them. Now, at some time during the year, our own City Department of Transportation had posted signs saying that there was no stopping allowed during these specific hours. So what LAUSD bus drivers decided to do was to tell the parents, we're not picking up your children in front of your houses for fear of getting a ticket. And the children were told and the parents that they had to go across this major thoroughfare, around the block, to this other spot that was convenient for the drivers to pick them up. Now, this was during the winter season, so there was rain going on, and the parents had gone to the school district. They tried to work with the city, simply wasn't coming to a successful solution. They came to us, and I remember sitting with the parents and with Stephen and one of our staff members, and trying to understand the situation. Really boggled that the school district would say that they couldn't stop to pick up children, that they could ignore the existing IEP, and their own Department of Transportation might ticket somebody for or a school bus for picking up a student. Now, we made a commitment to resolve and address this issue. Unfortunately for us, the pandemic started. But here was a case where you had immigrant parents who knew that they had a legal right to have their IEP in place, but simply ran up against obstacles and bureaucrats. And I'm a bureaucrat myself, but there's a positive and a negative to being a bureaucrat. In this particular case, it was troubling that we couldn't get these two institutions to do what was right, what made common sense. But those are the kinds of things where I think you can become involved, and where we as a city entity need to hear from you. We did not know that this was a problem. And it wasn't just this particular set of parents. This was probably occurring citywide, district-wide, and we weren't aware of it.
Great. Thank you, Jaime, and glad that you were made aware of it by folks raising their voices as we're asking everyone to do. I'm going to synthesize now a couple of questions that have come into the question box that essentially what they mean, what they say are, assuming that one doesn't want to litigate or take an adversarial approach, but wants to reach out to one's government to address ADA rights that are not being addressed, what are some recommendations you might make to someone who wants to engage on an issue? The short of the legal process. Who would like to start? Andrea, it looks like you might have an answer for me.
I don't have all the answers, but I can definitely give you my opinion. I think what they should do is, first of all, the city has a website, get familiar. Citizens should get familiar with their city's website and see if there's there will be phone numbers for them to contact, email, try to find out if there's there's a commission chair that they can reach out to. And so that's what I would do, to reach out to them in that way.
Matan, can I step in real quick?
Thank you, Andrea. And Jaime, yeah.
Let's flip the question around a little differently. I want to go back to something that Stephen Simon said earlier. We as public entities have an obligation, and that obligation is to serve our constituencies. Oftentimes, the onus is placed upon the constituency to learn to self-advocate. What I think we need to be able to do is to work within our own systems to teach our folks to be receptive, to listen to others. You know, it is unfortunate that the first response you'll get, and we'll get it here internally as well, is no. And it's because of some bureaucratic rule that someone is following, but there isn't any time taken. We talk about inclusive communication. It's a two-way streak. We simply can't be the ones promulgating information and say that we've complied. We have to take a different tack. I think it's incumbent upon public entities to make a concerted effort to educate their staff on how to listen and respond to the needs of people with disabilities.
Thank you, Jaime, and thank you, Andrea. Anastasia, do you have anything to add before we move to another question?
Yeah, briefly, I definitely agree with Jaime, and you introduced me through my role for the city as liaison, and the way that I describe what I do, mostly the crux of it is working really hard to connect disabled New Yorkers to what the city council is doing locally, and to educate all New Yorkers, but especially those with disabilities like myself, about the different ways that they can engage. And locally, that often looks like, you know, testifying at hearings, like has already been mentioned, getting to know, rolling or walking up to or taking a car or to your local representatives' district offices in your neighborhood, and learning about, you know, what the elected officials stand for. There are so many ways outside of litigation that citizens can educate themselves about their own rights, and about ways that they can get involved in, you know, impacting the decisions that are made in the communities in which they live, and that is essentially the biggest part of my role at the New York City Council, is bringing people with disabilities to the table, so they feel like they have a louder voice in the work that is being done on any number of issues. What I think we all need to understand is disability cuts across every issue that we live and experience and deal with, not only just as human beings, but as public servants. So whether we're dealing with transportation, education, healthcare, workforce development, you know, increasing inclusion, diversity, equality, opportunities for equality, all of those things have to involve disability. No matter what the issue, our voices need to be heard.
Thank you so much. So since we've just received what we'll call our 3-minute warning, I want to synthesize again a couple of questions and then literally ask each of you to spend 45 seconds to a minute on this question, if you would, which is, you know, if you had to encapsulate quickly your dream for how the populace with disabilities would engage with their government in the years to come, how would you describe that in 1 minute? Who would like to go first?
I'll go first. I mean, I'd like to see many more people with disabilities be able to vote independently and effectively. So increasing access to voting, which has to do a lot with structural accessibility and other related issues, and also seeing more people like us run for office.
Thank you. So
And,
two important ways to get involved: vote and run for office. Andrea.
and just to go back and echo what Jaime was saying, I 100% agree. It's a two-way street. And I would, on that point, speaking to that point, I would love to say that I would love to see in the future people, being engaged and going out and reaching out to the disability community, the leaders, not forgetting that we are opinion leaders and we do matter. We do make up a fourth of the world's population and the US population as well. I think moving forward, especially with COVID, I think we're going to have to use digital ways of communication. That's the way of the future. But to keep in mind that not everyone has access to computers and things of that nature. So to kind of find out, especially in those underrepresented groups and those underserved groups, what those needs are so that they can participate, because not everyone can participate and not everyone has access to communicate.
Thank you. So essentially finding ways to bring people together, promote that dialogue, different mediums for the future, or media as the word may be. Jaime, bringing us in with the last 1 minute.
Bear with me as I reveal my age once again. One of the most powerful books that I remember reading was the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I remember reading this as a young man and thinking, wow, this is powerful, that this gentleman says the most inspirational moment for him was getting off a plane in Africa and realizing that black men could be just about anything they wanted to be. And that really stayed with me. And so in response to your question, Matan, I really think it's critically important, not so much for people with disabilities to engage the public entities, but really about public entities making a concerted effort to ensure that their leadership, that their departments are filled with people with disabilities. So it doesn't become, it becomes the norm. Within the department, it should not be the department with disabilities that has the employees with disabilities. It should be every single department. Every single department should have a mandate that they fill. The feds have this mandate when it comes to federal contractors. Municipalities don't have that when it comes to their own contractors. It should be the case that people with disabilities are in positions of leadership. People with disabilities are part of the process, the planning process, part of the implementation process. People with disabilities should be the norm. As much as we are averse to say the norm, that is what they should be.
Thank you so much, Jaime. I want to thank this whole panel. And the theme that you've heard over and over again is the notion that they want you to engage. Thank you.
Remarkable, Matan. We thank you for chairing this meeting and the remarkable panelists, the astounding panelists. What a great set of information and inspiration that you provided. Thank you. We can all each play a pivotal role in paving progress. I would comment as an aside, the hardest step to take is the first step, the first phone call, the first showing up at the first meeting, the first question to a public official or a government official. After you do it once, you'll find how much easier it is to do it the second time and the third time, and then it becomes a lifetime habit. So keep up the good work, panelists, and all of you.